Vibrational Medicine is a podcast to bring awareness to the various natural wellness practices and treatments available. I am your host, Ash Neumeister, and these conversations are born out of my curiosity to learn more about the technologies available to us to stay in our optimal, vital, healthy, and natural state for our entire life, regardless of aging and all of the challenges of living in our modern day world. We will discuss topics covering how to stay healthy in mind, body, and spirit. Let's take a moment for one deep breath and then enjoy the conversation. On today's episode of Vibrational Medicine, I got to sit down and have a conversation with my dear friend, Tony Moss. He is a recording artist and has recently released an album with a collection of artists called Birds in Paradise that I highly recommend. And he also is the creator of a nonprofit that I am involved in called I Am Life. And we produce events that are focused on interconnectivity. This organization began because of Tony's realization that there was a complete lack of places for people to come and connect with themselves and with the community, and to learn about these various ancient technologies that have been passed down through the ages. So we have events in Los Angeles that usually involve live music and cacao ceremonies and our tea house. And then in addition to that, Tony has been in deep study and facilitation of ceremonies involving plant medicines. And he often talks about being in right relationship with Mother Earth and with plants, and is an advocate for the legalization and responsible use of these medicines. So we dive a little bit into the importance of community, of ceremony, of ritual, and how we really don't have much of that in Western culture. So it's important for us to create those spaces. And we also talk about vibrational medicine and why that is such an important piece of our overall health and wellness. So please enjoy the conversation and let us know what you think. All right. So today we are speaking with Tony Moss, which I am incredibly excited to have you be a part of this podcast. And you've been such an important person in my life over the last few years. And so I'm super excited to have this particular conversation with you because I feel aligned with both of our passions in a lot of ways. So yeah, really excited to just see where this conversation goes and keep it kind of informal, but share on several topics that we checked in about before this recording. And yeah, I'd love for you to start actually just by sharing with our listeners, anything that you feel that you're currently up to or want to share about, what's going on in the world that has to relate to the importance of people really taking responsibility for their own health and wellness and using these, new natural ways of healing and exploring other ways of being together.
That's beautiful. Well, as you mentioned, yeah, it's a topic that is close to my heart, and both of us, and particularly through our work with I'm Life, our nonprofit. I'll start by talking a little bit about that. One of the reasons I'm Life got founded was I started to realize probably the year or so before the organization was actually kind of officiated, I was noticing more and more people feeling really apathetic about the state of the world, and also just really disconnected. Not only disconnected like from other people, but this sense of disconnection from nature, from the planet, from the cosmos, from spirituality. And during that period, I was hosting some salons at my house. I was living in Long Beach at the time. And it was just a weekly gathering where we would get together and kind of just take on a topic, either maybe a spiritual topic or, some current affair or something in the news. And I started realizing really the value of the difference it made in people's lives right away, that they at least had once a week this group that they were connecting with. Yeah. And those gatherings started to become kind of ceremonial in the sense that they kind of had an official opening. We'd have like some music, and maybe we'd set an intention with the topic for the night. And during that period, I started researching ceremony in general. And this one book, I don't remember what it was called. It had to do with kind of the history of ceremony and what it was. And I learned a lot of things. One was that that's where theater started, you know.
Mm.
Yeah, theater was basically ritualized ceremony, and mainly as a way of sharing the cosmologies and values and stories. Like they would act out and theatrically kind of share the values of the community, or for passing of stories, because most of those cultures were, oratory at the time. And out of that, theater was born.
Oh,
Right? So it's
wow.
really, yeah. So there's always a theatrical element to ceremony, which there is, because it's ritualistic and it has order. And for it to have impact, it probably is going to have some kind of theatrical element. Hence
Totally.
what we do.
Mm-hmm.
But more importantly, the real core of ceremony, relative to our discussion, is it was in ceremony that our ancestors passed on the cosmology and the values of the culture, right? It was in ceremony that young people were ushered into and initiated into their roles in the community. Again, the cosmology, the spiritual beliefs. It kind of also marked their growth within the community, different types of ceremony, as you know, like rites of passage, initiation. And I
Mm-hmm.
started realizing, and later read a lot of people were thinking the same thing, that one of the problems with modern Western culture is that we lack ceremony, significant,
Mm-hmm.
authentic ceremony. And particularly rites of passages and initiations, where people get acknowledged for the different phases of their life, particularly young people,
Right.
where the entire village or community is saying, like, we now acknowledge that you were in this particular phase, right? And because
Mm-hmm.
of that, it has this new set of maybe not only benefits, but responsibilities and expectations. And those are important.
Totally.
And yeah, the example we've used, even in our life conversations, um, where we really see the lack of that is in young men going through puberty. Testosterone's coming on, and they're looking for a place to not only be acknowledged that they're in this new phase of their life, but they want something to do with it. Well, indigenous cultures, that was acknowledged, and there'd be rites of passages. Without
Mm-hmm.
that, we have, things like young men joining gangs. They're doing it for the
Right.
exact same reason. Yeah. They're being acknowledged that they have power. They're being acknowledged that they're independent. They're
Mm-hmm.
being given a place for that energy to show up, basically, in a destructive way, but
Mm-hmm.
still like, okay, this group is acknowledging who I am, right?
Yeah.
And that I now am in this new phase of my life. So long story short, I started realizing like, wow, ceremony is actually really valuable for cohesion for a community.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and also, again, a place where you can be with other people and kind of step outside of the pressures of our normal day-to-day lives in the matrix, the default reality, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of actually have a place to just explore spirit, explore yourself, right? And to get into more deeper, intimate issues that actually are really important that in normal Western culture get bypassed. Yeah.
Completely. Yeah, I feel like there isn't a lot of access to them, let alone even talked about in our Western culture. Like I grew
Mhm.
up in the Midwest, and I don't know if we really had any sort of access to, well, maybe we did, I just didn't know about it, as far as like indigenous rituals and cultures and
Right.
people that are from that area, which there's so many, Native Americans that are
Exactly.
from Minnesota. But I just didn't even know to look for it when I was younger. But then even in the Western culture, it's like, what did we have? I'm trying to think of any examples of like becoming into like womanhood. It's like, even when we would start menstruating or getting our cycle, like it was like this like scary thing, not talked about thing. You didn't go through any sort of like
Right.
ceremony or anything. Like, so
Yeah, and you don't talk about it at school. You don't even talk about it with your girlfriends necessarily.
yeah, no.
Suddenly you're menstruating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
And
the
so,
same thing for sexuality with young boys. It's like
mhm.
suddenly you're in puberty, you're able to masturbate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Basically these changes are happening that aren't being acknowledged I'm certainly there are some really awesome progressive families, right? But
Yeah.
in general, like with me, there was no kind of official acknowledgement of my sexuality when puberty came.
Hmm.
If anything, there was a shame around it. It's like when your parents suddenly discover that you're sexually active or at least capable,
Yeah,
suddenly like, here's this taboo thing we know is happening, but we're not going to talk about it, right? So,
exactly.
yeah, and that's why I feel I've quoted often as saying, I think a lot of the pathologies running through Western culture stem from two things. One, it's this taboo and suppression of
Hmm.
sexuality, like in a healthy way. And the
Hmm.
other is, again, this lack of acknowledgement of the rites of passages, the initiations from the different
Hmm.
phases from childhood into, teenage years, puberty, then when you're kind of expected to be an adult. Instead, we have this very empty ritual of graduation, you know.
Right.
And what do they do when you graduate? Okay, you can legally now drive and get drunk. Not great
Yeah.
combination, right? And you can vote, right? Yet there's been
Mhm.
no necessarily valuable preparation for
Right.
voting or drinking or driving. Right?
Yeah. Or I
Yeah,
guess marriage maybe would be something that's ceremony that a lot of people maybe don't even think of necessarily as a rite of passage, but that is something
yeah,
that we collectively acknowledge as a ceremony in Western culture. But other than that, there isn't really a whole lot. Maybe in some religions, obviously, like confirmation and things like that.
right.
Um, but yeah, as a way of coming together to really initiate something new or a new phase of life, or even just like you were saying, like a coming together to create that space for people to feel safe to explore who they are and to really deepen in their connection with themselves and with spirit in a way that everyone collectively is on the same page.
Yeah.
And I
I
feel,
was just, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I feel like that's what we do with our I Am Life events, is like really bringing that clear intention, that we're coming
Yeah,
together for a common intention, of expanding love or whatever it is at that particular event, and
yeah,
giving people that opportunity to have their own solo journey, within the celebration culture that we create with the
yeah,
music and the tea and the cacao ceremony and all the other elements that we bring in. But at the same time, they're in a community where they feel safe and like-minded and
yeah.
even inspired by each other. And that was one of the most, I mean, I guess it was expected, but not expected at the same time, like how impactful that was for people to come to our events because of the complete lack of something.
I completely agree. When we started doing the soul circles with I Am Life, um, it quickly surpassed even my expectations. And I realized later the reason why was I've been in a community, like 20 years now, of people that get together and do these things. And they're
Right.
second nature to me. And they've absolutely shaped and had a huge impact on who I am. I didn't realize how lacking it was, even in California. It's considered this like
Mm-hmm.
state, right? Until we started doing them. And people, as you know, will give us comments like, oh, I've been looking for this, or I finally found my tribe, or,
Mm-hmm.
for some people, even it's a life transforming event to be
Totally.
in a really open, non woo woo kind of setting where we're openly talking about the science of, like you said, vibrational medicine, the
Mm-hmm.
actual facts and science around the heart and love, and how that interacts with other people in the world. And yeah, and to be able to kind of openly be a person who is questioning reality or looking for an authentic kind of pathway to spirit,
Mm-hmm.
to explore things that they've seen or heard other people talking about, and now they're in a community of people that do it on a regular basis and they have access. Like, it's actually had a huge impact, right? And it
Mm-hmm.
has definitely forged a community. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
think the biggest reward for me with I Am Life has been how many people have used this exact phrase independently. It says, oh, I've been looking for this. I feel like I finally found my tribe. I'm like, yes, you have. We've been waiting for you
Totally. Yes,
to show up,
exactly.
basically. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah. And it's so nourishing for all of us too, even as we're facilitating it, just to be in that energy. And I love how we always talk about it, such a recharge, and then
yeah,
what is created from that consistently getting together in that way is that we can continue to go out in the world and do everything that we're up to. And you also, you, like you're saying, you're openly questioning reality. It's like that naturally happens when you're in these kind of environments on a consistent basis. And so you actually then evolve into wanting to try to make a difference, and really have an impact.
It's true. There's a impulse early on with I'm Life, because we have this platform available that we can like present these awesome things we're interested in to people. There's always this impulse to want to do it really big and a lot of it, right?
Yeah.
And what I realized is these Soul Circle events are introductions into these different worlds. Like you're getting like a 15-minute sound bath in the beginning, and you're getting the taste of the cacao ceremony. And then we might be dropping in some indigenous voices and wisdom here and there, and what happens actually is that it opens up these possibilities to people so that they later can contact you and say, I want to come to a full sound bath, or I actually want to study, Native American or indigenous ceremony, right? So I saw it as, I feel like our events, in addition to them being authentic community ceremonies, right, and offering all the same things that traditional indigenous ceremonies offer, at the same time, I considered the events like bridges, right? We're bridging contemporary Western culture, certainly at least in our state, our community, into these other modalities and possibilities of exploration for people, right? And that's really valuable, right? And this term you've heard me use before, like I love demystifying things, like taking things like vibrational medicine, for instance. I can hear somebody, hearing that term and thinking like, oh my God, vibrational medicine, how woo-woo is that? But what we actually do is break down and go, well, this is what it is. This is the science and research behind why it works. And this is actually why it's called vibrational medicine, right? Or why, for instance, like with the work we do with the Institute of Heart Math, actually talking about the research and the science around the electromagnetic field around the body, which I think spiritual people call the aura. We know it's an actual thing, right? That is emanated from the heart, that is vibrational, right? And that those fields that each of us have around us, it's like a torus, are actually in communication all the time. Like when you meet a person, your field of energy is already communicating with that person, right?
Right.
So that's not some airy-fairy woo-woo kind of whatever. That's actually a science that's being researched. And the hypothesis is that those fields are probably actually in communication with the planetary electromagnetic field, right?
Yeah.
So I love this idea of vibrational medicine when you look at it, even in terms of like the placebo effect, epigenetics, all those things come into play when you're in the world of vibrational medicine, which I would love to hear your definition of that, but I tend to think of it as just subtle medicine, like medicine and modalities that work on a subtle vibrational level that on ways we don't fully understand have to be at work. Otherwise, we wouldn't really have a foundational understanding for things like epigenetics or, placebo effect healing,
Yeah.
Yeah, I was watching there's this new special on Netflix. I'm forgetting what it's called, but it's this guy who basically kind of debunks all of everything from supplements to spiritual healing techniques, right? And he's not doing it in a way of all of this stuff is bullshit, but they very fairly look at it. And then all these other researchers and people are going like, okay, that's total bullshit. There's no evidence that this thing works, but they do say in almost every episode. However, if you go to a Reiki practitioner and they do their thing on you and you get healed from whatever, that's still medicine and it's still working.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So the fact that we don't fully understand how it's working, or there's no scientific basis for it working, doesn't mean that it's not valid as a human reality. But the very fact that I think if I'm coming to a sound healing that it's going to help me release some trauma, and it does, then bingo. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, one of my other teachers that I interviewed in one of the other podcasts, Wayne Perry, he always talks about the fact particularly with sound healing, when you go to a sound bath, you're receiving these relaxing regenerative sounds. They're not necessarily healing, but you can't like discount yourself for the one that's doing the actual healing. Like you have to be open to
Exactly.
it. You have to be allowed to, just be in that state of relaxation to actually fully be able to receive those sounds. And so it is on a subtle level, it's
Yeah.
different for every single person. But yeah, to it's almost like giving your power away, when you say something else is doing something to you. And so
Yeah.
even if you go to a Reiki session and you're coming at it with like total like skepticism and this isn't going to work and that whole mentality, you're
The
creating
problem
that
grows.
experience. Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. And so, but if you're very open and you're in a place where you are even just curious or ready to receive something like that, it can be incredibly powerful. And so it's
Absolutely.
such on a
Yeah.
subtle level.
Yeah, I agree. Just the willingness,
Mm-hmm.
to suspend your either disbelief or skepticism, and just, well, there's certainly no harm in being open to the possibility that it could heal me. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that can shift everything. I
Mm-hmm.
was while you were talking to Sin, I was remembering, I have this little like bald spot, at
Mm-hmm.
54, and which doesn't bother me at all. But a friend of mine, like a couple of years back, gave me this oil as a gift, and it had like hair restoration, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of like, first of all, I'm like, what are you trying to say?
Right. I don't
And it
need
was
this.
actually, and then I remember I asked her. I said, well, I said, I've been looking at this, and most of the things that claim to restore hair don't, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know why you would think this oil would. And it was interesting. She said, well, you have to believe it will. And
Mm-hmm.
I originally just kind of like rolled my eyes at that and like, oh my gosh. But
Mm-hmm.
then later I was thinking about that and like, wow, actually what she said is true. Not literally like, well, if I believe this will grow my hair, it will. She was
Mm-hmm.
actually speaking this language that is in a lot of ways at the core of what we're talking about how vibrational medicine can work. Some of it
Mm-hmm.
literally physically is working. So
Yeah.
much of it has to do with your willingness, right, to be open
Mm-hmm.
to the possibility. And again, what we're calling the placebo effect. I
Mm-hmm.
thought, I go, no, I'm not willing to put this oil on my scalp and go, okay, I believe this will grow my hair, right?
Right.
But at the same time, I felt like she was speaking a fundamental truth.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe had she given me that and I immediately said like, well, this is fantastic. I'm going to use it every day. If I were somebody that had a like fundamental enthusiastic response and believed that
Mm-hmm.
this would work, I'd be willing to bet that there probably would have been some hair growth at this point, right?
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
So basically, I realized basically she was in making that statement, she was kind of highlighting something we're talking about, that there's this interactive thing with all healing, particularly with vibrational healing,
Mm-hmm.
that it wasn't me just slapping this Western scientific thing on my scalp. It was actually a relationship I was entering with the intention to grow hair and
Mm-hmm.
my willingness to kind of support the possibility that whatever was in this, little oil thing could actually work. Right.
Yeah,
It's interesting.
totally. Yeah, and for people that are listening to this that are maybe just beginning to become curious about alternate forms of healing or, outside of Western medicine, just know that, you can look in history. And I was listening to a podcast yesterday about this actually, where he was going back and talking about different situations where Western medicine like was basically like an all-out war on all other kinds of medicine, that was
Exactly.
saying that they were, witchcraft, or just saying that none of them worked. And so it totally changed our mentality to think like things like aromatherapy and acupuncture, even chiropractic
Yeah.
care, eating
Well,
healthy,
even
all these things.
yeah, ancient passed down through lineage herbal remedies.
Mm-hmm.
We're all, you're right, all got poo-pooed and
Yeah.
woo-wooed, right? And now what we're seeing on Facebook and everywhere on social media is the resurgence of those things with modern
Yeah.
science saying, guess what? This does work.
Exactly. Yeah. And so
uh,
now, fortunately, there is studies that are being done and things that are coming out to support, like the Institute of Heart Math and all these things that are really helping to bring the science into proving it again, because it comes back to what we were saying, like, okay, it's proven, so now I can believe it, you know,
Right.
whereas before we're saying you have to have the belief without the proof often in these
Right.
alternate forms of healing, you know, like working with crystals or
Yeah.
aromatherapy and all these
And you're
things.
right. People aren't empowered. Western medicine is like, there's something wrong with me. Please fix it. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
empowering the doctor or the medication, which most
Mm-hmm.
of them don't work for most people or all people, and have
Mm-hmm.
tons of toxic side effects. The whole story. We're speaking to the choir on that subject. Yet here we have these ancient, healing modalities, techniques, remedies that are proven to work for, and a lot of times, for a larger percentage of the population with almost no side effects.
Right.
So all of that was robbed from us during that period you're talking about, when literally driven by um, profit and control,
Yeah.
that there were, as we know, systematic campaigns designed to denigrate these healing modalities so that we could switch people over to taking cough syrup instead, right?
Right.
Which we know most of them don't do any better than elderberry or honey and pepper,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not more effective. They're just more
Right.
expensive
Yeah.
and
And
often
have
have side effects.
and bad side effects. Right. If you're taking plants
Yeah,
or natural things, they're going to have good side effects.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it is interesting how that happened. And so and just acknowledging also that, you know, we're programmed to think a lot of things that we do. And so this podcast is about getting people to really question things around health and wellness and what we can be doing in a natural way to be preventative, right? Because Western medicine is very good for acute, like emergency care, you know, but as far as actually staying in your vital, healthy state, it's important for us to be incorporating a lot of these vibrational medicines into staying healthy and preventing it from getting, you know, to a point where we might need to go to the ER or whatever. And so
Yeah.
just knowing that it is important to, especially in this modern day and age, you know, where we're exposed to a lot of things that we weren't, let's say that even just one generation ago, you know, with what's going on with our food supply and the air quality and all these things, that we really do have to support our health in a bigger way than we would have, let's say, like even my parents'
Yeah.
age.
I love that you said that, because something I share, often is this idea that in no way am I discounting or trying to undermine the benefits of Western medicine. It's miraculous what Western
Mm-hmm.
medicine has to be. And for acute things, absolutely. To repair damage that has actually been done, Western medicine, right? To
Mm-hmm.
get diagnosed, Western medicine, amazing.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, my approach, I was just sharing this with a friend, is if you think something's wrong, get a diagnosis for sure from a Western doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Find out and pinpoint what's going wrong with you. But then look at all the possibilities for the healing, right?
Yeah.
You don't just automatically take a prescription. It's like, oh, well, you have acute, whatever it is, meningitis, who knows? And then you go look on the internet or check with the alternative methods and go, what are all the ways people are healing this? Because oftentimes you'll find out that, oh, I can just take turmeric, right? I don't
Right.
need to be hooked on a $60 a bottle pharmaceutical for the next 6 months, right?
Mm-hmm.
That has lots of side effects and may not actually work for me specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Yet I can get the same effects from taking turmeric, with no side effects and probably a fraction of the cost.
Yeah,
I think it's really valuable. Yeah.
totally.
And what
And
you said, I think the most important thing, I'm sorry to cut you off, the vibrational medicine or the alternative healing methods, Western medicine is not for preservation of health, right? It is not an approach to health. It is an approach to fixing things that have gone wrong, right?
mm-hmm.
The vibrational approaches are about maintaining health. It's about maintaining health and balance so you don't get sick in the first place. And that's their role, I think, where they're most important, right?
Yeah, and should always be used in conjunction with Western medicine too.
And as an ongoing way to deal with the subtle things before they become problems.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, the perfect example, of course, I would say like a sound bath or things like that. We know that a lot of dramatically, dangerous diseases have their start in stress and trauma.
Yeah.
So why not be doing something, because we all live in an environment in the West where we're exposed to stress, and tension on a
Mm-hmm.
regular basis. Having a monthly practice or so of, doing yoga and going to a sound bath, and
Mm-hmm.
engaging in some of the other kind of more subtle health, I think preservation and maintenance techniques could
Mm-hmm.
probably keep you from down the line developing something that needs a more serious
Mm-hmm.
approach.
Oh, completely. Yeah, I really do believe wholeheartedly that every single person on this planet needs something that helps them with stress relief. I mean, it's just part of
Oh
being
yeah, yeah,
human, and really seeing that as an essential thing, though, and not something that you do even when you're waiting until you're about to have an anxiety attack, or so many people suffer from chronic anxiety attacks, and to really
yeah,
see that you can prevent them,
yeah. Over the
practice.
years working with plant medicines, the most common reason that people eventually decide they want to do something like ayahuasca, for an example, is because they've tried everything else and nothing is helping them with their anxiety, depression, and
Mm-hmm.
PTSD that they isn't even diagnosed, but they realize at some point, oh, this is all related to that traumatic experience that I had, right?
Yeah.
Um, and again, going back to the importance of ceremony, indigenous cultures recognize, they're living in these intense survivals early on. Uh, Survival in terms of the environment and other tribes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they recognized there needed to be rituals and ceremonies where people could come and basically grieve, right? And
Mm-hmm.
the other was to kind of go to the edge of their psyche and let it all out, right? So some
Yeah.
of the rituals were just like, there was one I remember reading about in this book, Wizard of the Upper Amazon, where they made a form of basically kind of like beer, right? But as a sacrament.
Mm-hmm.
And this once or twice a year ritual, they would get together, they would all drink, the whole village would basically get drunk on this sacrament. But the shaman, the village leader, would use that as an opportunity to bring up all the grievances. Like, okay, I know you two have been having tension over this woman, so go ahead and fight it out.
Wow.
uh,
Yeah.
or they could yell and scream or become intoxicated and kind of go crazy in the context of a ceremony, basically kind of purifying their psyche of all these neurotic thoughts and tension that had built up throughout the year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So they recognized this was important because it was like, relieving the pressure cooker, like letting out the
Yeah.
tension. So again, that was a way of keeping the entire village or community healthy. Going back to what we were talking about earlier, we don't have that in Western culture.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us have the experience of people saying to you as a platitude, "Oh, how are you doing?" But then they keep walking, right? They don't
Yeah.
actually,
I notice
right?
that all the time.
Yeah. It's like,
Yeah.
why ask?
Yeah. Or
Yeah,
how much I just automatically say good. Like,
exactly. How's it
I'm
going?
good.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So imagine though that you are somebody who is experiencing either social anxiety or social isolation, like you're feeling lonely, or maybe there's grief happening in your life and you don't have a safe place or close enough relationships to actually express to people what's
Yeah.
going on with you. Yet people are asking and not really listening.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, that becomes intensified, leads to depression. Eventually, it's suicidal because I think isolation is like a downward spiral. The
Yeah.
more isolated you are, the more isolated you become. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Typically, the more depressed you are, the more depressed you become. The more anxious you are, right? Um, so having a place again, a ceremonial space, whether it's going to yoga, to sound bath, coming to the events like our Soul Circle, is giving people a place to actually go and on that night you're going to be connecting with other human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And you know that if someone asks how you are, chances are you can actually tell them, right?
Right.
That's the importance, I think, of these beyond the benefits of, let's say, the cacao at the cacao ceremony or the
Mm-hmm.
sound healing at the sound bath. It's also like being with, as you said earlier, like-minded people who actually care, right,
Mm-hmm.
about other human beings, where you can actually show up and you can cry if you want to, which, as you've seen,
Yeah.
happens often in our events. You can
Mm-hmm.
actually like start crying and someone will walk over and go, hey, what's going on with you? Oh, my aunt died last week, or I just ended this relationship. And at those events, someone will actually take an interest, even for a
Mm-hmm.
minute, right? If
Yeah.
not the whole night. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's incredibly essential for people to have a sense of community to be healthy. It's like a main
Absolutely.
tenant, in people's lives. And also, I think it ultimately it's because we want to belong, right? We want to feel like we belong to
Oh
something.
yeah, we're social creatures. That's proven.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's super important for everyone to find whatever that is for them, you know, in their own community, or maybe even create something like you did, you know, at your house when you were doing those gatherings, and
Yeah.
have that
I mean, one
space.
of the things we know for sure is when prisoners of any kind are kept in isolation, we know what happens. They go
Hmm.
crazy, right? You
Yeah.
get some form of mental stress, dis-ease, mental
Hmm.
illness, even psychotic behavior, whatever it is. And I was looking at that and I thought the same thing happens in a lot of ways, even worse, for people that feel completely alone in society, right?
Hmm.
That form of isolation, although you're interacting like at the checkout counter or whatever, if you're completely isolated amongst a lot of people, the same kind of mental dis-ease can start to
Hmm.
set in. And we're seeing it every place. You know, it's just watching, we've heard this before, but just recently I was reading again, like the number two cause of death amongst young men is suicide. You know, certainly in
Wow.
like China and Japan,
Yeah.
and it's growing here, right? And if you, that's remarkable when you think about it. You know that
Hmm.
you're in this advanced quote unquote civilization, right?
Hmm.
Where life is basically pretty good. Most of our needs are being met, and there's actually plenty of time for socializing and hanging out with people and connecting. Yet people are killing themselves. You
Hmm.
know, yeah. It for me, it's one of the symptoms and signs of this absolute breakdown of well, and the truth behind the lie of the American dream, Western culture, and capitalism. You know, like
Right.
me, what it would promise people a better life clearly cannot be true, since most people are suffering from anxiety, depression,
Hmm.
on opioids. Did I say that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or killing themselves because they just can't find enough joy, chemically or otherwise, to engage in life and feel
Hmm.
fulfilled. So
Yeah.
it's literally a symptom of the breakdown of our culture, right? And that it has in
Right.
a lot of ways failed people.
Completely. And that, one of the contributing factors to that, I really do think, is, well, the isolation, obviously. I mean, just the fact that we use it as a form of punishment. I mean, like,
Exactly.
obviously it does something
Exactly.
bad to us. And
Right.
the complete lack of these communities and rituals and ceremonies within cultures is, it's what you were saying earlier, you know, how it starts as anxiety and then depression, and then it just cycles and it keeps getting worse.
Yeah.
And unless you break that cycle and you have this ceremony that you can go to, or this gathering, even if that's church, you know, whatever that is for you, to like have that ritual, you know, something, doing something
Mhm.
consistent that helps you feel part of something, and that you belong, and that you're part of a tribe. and and it's can be challenging in busy modern day life. Like, I know for myself, even, you know, sometimes I work 60 hours a week and I'm just like
Right.
nonstop, and I'll get to the end of the week and I am so exhausted, I just want to like stay home, you know. And it's like,
Yeah.
but I've become more aware now that, like, fortunately I have commitments. I was just thinking about this last night, actually, because I facilitate breathwork and sound healing on 2 Friday nights a month. And so it's like the
Right.
perfect way to end my week is to be in that space. And it totally is
Yeah.
recharging, you know, even just in an hour. And even though I'm
Yeah.
facilitating, but still for me, it's essential for me to have those things built into my schedule, and making it a
Yeah.
priority and a necessity.
Absolutely. Yeah, because you mentioned like I call it kind of getting a tune up. Anything you're doing like that on a regular basis becomes the consistent way that you balance out, manage, release your stress load, you know, a place where at least for sure during that period you're going to be connecting with people in an authentic way. At least there's a
Mm-hmm.
fertile ground for it. Yeah, all those things that are essential to being healthy, particularly in modern life, when there's not only so much, I think, hours spent in being productive, but also so much information coming at us, all the time that's needing to be
Mm-hmm.
managed.
Yeah.
That the time we take for ourselves, to connect with things that actually value, it's fundamental. I don't think it's a luxury. I mean, it might be a
Mm-hmm.
luxury that you have access to it, but
Yeah.
it's not a luxury in that it's actually showing up to be a fundamental need for health. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, one thing that I was thinking about when you were talking to, there's a really, I feel like I need to do a separate podcast on talking about grief, you know, and the
Yeah,
necessity of really creating space for that in our culture, and which happens a lot in like the ceremonies that you facilitate with plant medicines. It's the first time that
Yeah.
people really give themselves the opportunity to feel all of that grief that they've been storing. And it's ancestral for a lot of us, you know, because if you think about the world and how people are often refugees and having to run for their
Yeah.
lives and displaced, they don't have the time to grieve. And
Yeah.
so
Period.
they have to just stay alive. And so that's been happening, you know, forever. And so a lot of the
Yeah.
times that grief is stored within our lineage. And so I know for myself, when I would do ceremonies with plant medicine and get into these other dimensions and different spaces where you can tap into other energies, I would be expressing this profound, deep grief. And I didn't know where it was coming from. I didn't feel like it was necessarily
Right.
mine. And I do believe, you know, from just my personal view, that it was my lineage, you know, especially I can
Mhm.
remember one time particularly, like the women in my family. And I feel like that's an important piece that people should be made aware of, and that how important it is to really allow yourself to cry and to grieve.
It's so
So
crucial.
important.
And I've shared this with you, are aware of it, and I've shared with people that are listening. Most people aren't aware that they're carrying around grief and or trauma,
Mm-hmm.
right? And just for everyone that doesn't know, there's scientific proven research now that we all carry in our DNA the trauma of our ancestors. It's all encoded in there, right? So in addition to the compounded experiences you've had in your own lifetime, things that might have been traumatizing or things that probably should have been grieved that weren't, you're carrying all this other stuff. The plant medicines typically, and maybe just any kind of authentic ceremonial experience,
Mm-hmm.
all of that suddenly gets unleashed, right? And a lot of people that come to plant medicine ceremonies think they're coming for some other reason. What ends up
Mm-hmm.
happening is they suddenly start releasing, let's say, grief, and they'll tell me later, like, I had no idea that I needed to grieve. Like everything got handled just in that moment, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's because of what you're bringing up. Like most of us don't realize we're in survival mode all the time. You know, you're just getting up every day and doing what's necessary to keep your life happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maintain, particularly in our culture. And it doesn't really even strike you as necessary to take time out for self-care or grief or,
Mm-hmm.
doing the kind of interpersonal work, the self-inquiry, to kind of look in there and realize like, oh, actually, I'm still dealing with that trauma from when I was 8. Like
Right.
there really isn't even time to get subtle enough and quiet enough to realize that there's something going on that is actually dictating. This is the interesting thing. A lot of people think, well, that's kind of woo-woo or unnecessary because I'm functioning fine. What they don't realize is that those unexpressed or unclear griefs and traumas are actually dictating your every action every day. You just don't see it, right?
Right.
Yeah, they're actually dictating how you're interacting with men or women, depending on your relationship. They might be
Mm-hmm.
dictating how you're interacting with work, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
politics, or people other than the way you look, like whatever it is, or even your motivations, right? A lot of people discover like, oh, the whole reason I've been driven to do such and such is because I'm actually avoiding this, right?
Right.
I tend to think a lot of people don't realize that they're not even actually leading authentic lives, meaning the actions that they're making every day and the goals that they're pursuing. The beautiful thing about these subtle vibrational healing modalities and the ceremonies that they're connected to is that people actually get still enough and quiet enough to look inside and realize like, actually, this isn't even what I want to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, like once I kind of get in touch, I might get closer to the original authentic thing that kind of motivated me out of high school, whatever, to kind of like
Mm-hmm.
get on with my life and have a meaningful life that is fulfilling based on things that actually are important to me. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of people, I can't even tell you how many over the years, the main thing they get out of plant medicine work, in my case, ayahuasca work, because that's what I'm most interested in, is this kind of getting their life back. They will tell me, oh, I feel reborn. And suddenly I realize that I'm on the wrong path And there is a way to kind of put a halt to what I'm doing and kind of start veering back to what would actually make me happy, which almost always includes wanting to give back to the world and support people in some way, right? That
Right.
gets lost. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and beyond the effects of the trauma and grief having an impact in like the decisions you make and things like that, it can also affect you on a physical level, right? Like
Absolutely.
I remember Martin Prechtel is an amazing teacher, and he talks a lot about grief. And I remember one thing that has always stuck with me is that he calls tumors solidified sorrow. And
Oh,
so,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, so that holding on to that grief, you know, especially the ancestral that I was talking about before, it's like you
Yeah.
store all of that in your body and then it can become cancerous, you know, if we're not
Yeah.
releasing and allowing that energy to flow. And that like hit me like, whoa, like that's a profound way of putting it.
It really is. And, and that goes to the core of like an indigenous approach. Well, I'll be specific, like the shamanic approach in, let's say, the Shipibo ayahuasca tradition. And, shaman, the word shaman is, as a word that's imposed on them. It's actually a Siberian term. Curanderos, the healers, their healing practice is based on the idea that even though you have this physical ailment, its roots are energetic. That's what you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of them like, well, we're not going to deal with the physical thing, like in the ceremony. There's definitely like pharmaceutical plant-based herbs you can take for that. What we want to get at is at the foundation, the core, like what actually is causing the thing. And inevitably it comes down to something like unexpressed grief, trauma,
Mm-hmm.
some stress, some what they call panema bad energy that you've been carrying in the body for a long period of time that now has turned into the ulcer or turned into
Mm-hmm.
like the cancer, right? So they're wanting to, the healing is holistic in that sense. It's like,
Right.
yeah, we're definitely going to give you some plants from the jungle that will help dissolve the tumor. What we want to get at is the cause of the tumor, like
Mm-hmm.
fundamentally, energetically, the cause of the tumor. We're
Mm-hmm.
not just going to go cut it out. Right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I think a lot of the times people that do 100% the Western approach and they don't do the, focusing on what caused it in the first place,
Yeah, in conjunction. Yeah.
yeah, they'll end up, having the surgery, going through the chemo, the radiation, whatever, the cancer's gone, but then it comes back,
Exactly. Yeah.
so that's the
I
importance of
don't,
doing it in conjunction.
you remind me of this story. I read this many years ago and I don't remember any more of the details in terms of where it was published, but it's an authentic study. And basically, I'm just giving you the essence of what happened. So it was a double blind kind of study, and basically this guy had a cancer and, or something like that. And he was given a placebo, right? And they basically told him that it was miraculous and that it would heal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he goes to this thing and it gets healed, right? It gets
Mm-hmm.
completely taken care of. He finds out later, it's like, oh, guess what? That was actually the placebo. You healed yourself. And the cancer came back.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it was interesting. And then apparently, same thing happened again. Yeah. So this happened twice. And he was a really interesting case because they showed like his belief that it was healed and gone, healed it and it was gone. And then when he
Mm-hmm.
found out, oh, guess what? That actually wasn't a thing. Then it came back, right?
Right.
There, there's been tons and tons of double-blind studies with placebos that have basically showed the same thing, that
Right.
our interaction, like we're basically showing the necessity of our partnership with the healing process, right? Of wanting to be healed, wanting to take responsibility for it, believing in the thing, whether it's Western medicine or not, you know, yeah, and engaging in that process. Because when his illness came back, what that showed me was like, oh, his complete faith is in this thing, not in his own ability to be healed, right? The second
Mm-hmm.
he found out that it actually wasn't what he thought it was, it all came rushing back.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that is
Yeah, it's
the power of the thought.
fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So bringing this full circle, most ceremonial work that I have encountered, because most of them are plant medicine based, but not all of them include some level of vibrational healing, which is what you're interested in.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's through sound, drumming, which we know beats per minute have an effect on, our system, take us into
Mm-hmm.
different states. A lot of those states are where healing can take place. Yeah, they go hand in hand. There's very few ceremony practices that I'm aware of that are effective that don't also include some form of what in the spectrum of vibrational healing. Yeah,
Right.
vibrational medicine. Yeah.
Yeah, completely. And just, also to highlight again to the importance for everyone to find that their form of ceremony, and that even if it's with one other person, just starting something where you can come together and just be real with each other, or, play some sound healing on YouTube, like it doesn't have to be
Yeah.
anything amazing, just
And even
creating
like I
some
said,
tension.
yeah, what changed the whole direction of my life and led into everything I'm doing now, bringing this really full circle, was what you brought up early on. I started off not knowing I was, moving my life into a particular direction. You know, I was in Santa Barbara at a lecture. I think his name was Daniel Sheehan, and he was talking about the importance of just getting together with people once a week in your living room and just talking. Because
Mm-hmm.
he said even that in current society is a radical act, that you're willing to actually talk about issues. And amongst other things, and just connecting with people, building community. And I thought, well, I'm going to take that on. So I chose a Wednesday night in Long Beach, and the group ended up being called Bundle of Twigs, right? This idea that one twig can be snapped, but a bundle is strong, right?
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So we got together every Wednesday, and it was life-changing for a lot of people in the sense that what we talked about, the bonds that were built, right? The community that was forged, and some of the ideas that got expressed, for a lot of people really opened them up to a whole different path that they wouldn't have been on otherwise. And for me, it was my first kind of sense that I had an ability and a leaning towards wanting to create and probably be leader of a community, right? It just started to
Mm-hmm.
emerge, right? It wouldn't have happened otherwise. Some of
Mm-hmm.
the ideas we got exposed to, the importance of community, a lot of people only had that once a week meeting to actually connect with other people and talk about things that mattered. And I started to see how valuable it was, right? For
Mm-hmm.
them, that was like their touchstone. That was the place where they couldn't wait till Wednesday night, where they could actually go be human with other humans.
I know that
So
feeling.
yeah, I bring that up to basically highlight what you were just saying. It doesn't matter what your modality is, right? It could just be that once a week you have a dinner party, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the whole ritual of having people over and helping to prepare the meal and talking about things that matter and then sitting down and eating together, that can be just as powerful as a ceremony for a lot of people. Well, so at least do that. you know.
Right. Yeah, completely. That's a good recommendation for sure. This is making
And
me
then,
want to start doing it again, like doing a weekly thing. I was like, maybe we should start doing this more
yeah,
than just
really,
our.
and then all these other modalities in subtle contemporary ways would enter the picture. Like,
Mm-hmm.
maybe every week you focus on like prior to dinner or afterwards, everybody sits for 15 minutes and you listen to sound meditation music, sound
Yeah.
healing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe at each of the dinners, let's talk about one thing tonight. Let's pick a topic and I'll discuss it.
Mm-hmm.
It really is a very contemporary way of getting the same benefits of indigenous traditional ceremony, right?
Yeah.
That's very grounded in your day-to-day life. That can meet everybody where they're at and doesn't have to have any name to it or ascribe to a particular modality, but you're getting the same benefits. Yeah.
Completely. For sure.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, to wrap up, I always like to ask my guests three
Yeah.
things that they want to share that you use in your own personal life to support you when you're like feeling like you need to lift a pick me up, or like rituals that you do on a daily basis to support you in staying in a high vibration and staying healthy.
Well, I'm a unique case because we have on life, right?
Yeah.
And all the events related to it. So maintaining that and all of the relationships around it are doing a lot of that already. But I would say my personal practice is the stillness with gratitude. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I've often I've been quoted many times for saying that if you look closely, the answer to most of our problems is actually just gratitude, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so for me, and it's not something I do every day, but it's something I do on a regular basis for sure. is to get out of bed in the morning, or particularly in the day when it's kind of getting stressful and you're getting caught up in the inertia of your story, your stuff. It's actually just stop for a minute, even in the car, and just kind of bring my presence to gratitude. It's like, and I go over the list. I'm like, I'm grateful for my apartment. I'm grateful for the safety I have. I'm grateful for life. I'm grateful for David, my roommate and assistant, and just goes on and on and on, right? Because it actually kind of takes your mind out of the constant need to achieve the next thing, or to be on this inertia of what you're getting or not getting, right? And just kind of come back to a centered place of like, because right away you notice your breathing changes, right? All the things that don't matter kind of start to fade away, and your attention is back on things like my cat. That matter. And the gratitude brings you into this state of gratitude. An interesting thing about that is, going back to the Institute of Heart Math, what they basically say in layman's terms is that when we're in feelings of gratitude, right, and joy, and forgiveness, those feelings get encoded into the electromagnetic field, right, that's emanating from our heart. And they believe that those feelings then interact with other electromagnetic fields. And probably the hypothesis is that it's interacting with the planetary field. So taking that moment to bring yourself back into a state of gratitude affects your entire vibrational body, right? And then it's going to affect the very next person you run into, right?
Totally.
So I would say that more than anything else, that's kind of the practice that keeps me centered and grounded when I'm not at one of our amazing projects or events.
Right. I love that. That's one of my favorites as well. I feel like that's probably been the single most thing that's changed my life the most, is having consistent coming back to gratitude. As much as often, it really does shift
as
everything.
simple as it sounds, it's one of the most profound things you can do. Yeah, because you really do realize that no matter how bad it is in the moment, the story of whatever you're in, you start to realize how much better you have it than most people on the planet. Right?
Yeah.
And in reality, it's like, wow, this is a big, challenging thing I'm going through right now. But ultimately, things are pretty good.
Right. Yeah. And I think the more you do it too, it's like you're subconsciously programming your brain to always look for that in every situation.
I'm so glad you brought that up. It's huge, actually. Like the neurobiology of gratitude. Like, honestly, we're at the end of our talk, but what I was saying is, like, it is true. There's this phrase that a lot of us have heard: we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are. Right? And it's true. They're talking about exactly that we're all filtering the information coming in, and 8 people in a room might see the exact same thing. One person sees it as the most beautiful, blissful thing ever. The other person, it sends them into depression and anxiety, right? So, and it's because of how we're all hardwired, our neural network. So there's a science too. If you every day can bring yourself back to gratitude, as you just said, you're literally training yourself, right, to be in a state of receptivity and gratitude for life. And the challenges are being met in that filter. It's like, oh, here's this challenge. It's not the end of the world, right? And it's not a reason to freak out and despair. It just needs to be handled, because in reality, life is good and I'm grateful.
Right. Exactly.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's a beautiful opportunity to drop in with you.
Yeah, for sure. Good. That's what I love about podcasts, is just like having time to chat,
I love that you're approaching it that way, because to close, what you just brought up is why I like podcasts as well. It's actually rare in our contemporary culture that you can just sit and just drop in for a full hour with somebody about a topic that in reality a lot of other people are probably interested in too.
Exactly. Awesome.
Cool.
Well, I hope everyone listening was interested in this particular talk.
If 2 or 3 people care, I'm happy.
Yeah, exactly.
Hopefully hundreds.
Yes. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being a part of this. And I have a feeling we will probably do another one down the line.
Yeah, count me in. We'll talk about grief next time around.
There we go. Awesome. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
I hope everyone enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. If you want to get in touch with Tony, you can find him on all the social medias, but also his website is www.tonymoss.me. All right, y'all. Thanks so much for listening. Have a beautiful day. And don't forget to share this out if you found value in this conversation. Bye for now.